Well, welcome. The last couple of videos certainly got people talking if comments are anything to go by. And as that was the whole point of the last video, thank you so much to everyone that contributed. Apart from the guy who suggested I shoot myself, of course. Then mysteriously disappeared. Haha. No, honestly, nothing to do with me. I've no idea where he went. You see, as the subject of ISO and noise became so subjective since the evolution of the digital camera, I think it's well worth looking a little closer. So in this video, I'm testing the D5, the Z6ii and the Z7ii at high ISOs. Now, even though the Japanese manufacturers have to be specific as to which system they've chosen to rate the ISO on their latest camera, using either the recommended exposure index or the standard output density, there are so many variations of how the sensors etc. are designed. It seems those same camera companies can veer towards ISO numbers that favour their latest product. So, how can we tell? Well, it was so much easier back in the olden days when we knew that our roll of ISO 100 film was great for sunny days, whereas 200 was cloudy. Going to a party? Grab a roll of 400 ISO. And that was because the light sensitivity of different film types or grain size was standardised by the American Standards Association, ASA, and the International Standards Organisation, which is where we get ISO from. So, now everything's electronic, we need to do visual comparisons. But you know, even that's fraught with variations. If you can use the correct exposure in decent light, the noise that the high ISO often gives can be negligible, or at least manageable. But in low light, when you still need higher shutter speeds, it can really get very messy indeed. So, as I said, whilst my Z9 is still sat in numerous parts bins deep in a Nikon factory somewhere, I thought I'd do some ISO comparisons from the aforementioned Z7ii, Z6ii and D5. Now, I'll be honest with you, maybe I should have done these using aperture priority, but to be honest, with the imminent collection of two of my test cameras, a certain clock watching obsession occurred. And basically I just plain forgot. So, these are all done with 125 shutter priority, and I apologise for the dark early images. I could of course up the exposure in the software, but that would have skewed the results. And it's the higher ISOs we're interested in anyway. For me, especially the 8000 and 10,000. So let's stick with the unedited images. Now, don't worry, we're not going to loiter too much with each set, as there's about 17 of them. And I don't want you all fast forwarding until you see me chatting again. We start at 2000 as I guess that's the first serious number where we may see some noise. As expected, though, nothing yet, and nor should there be. We're now up to 3200 and 4000, and they're looking good. But as I say, so should they be. We're using modern technology after all. Okay, now we've reached those 8000 and 10,000 levels I often use indoors, and we start to see noise creeping in. Bearing in mind it's always worse in the shadows. Interesting, isn't it, that at 16,000 the Z6ii has started to show a marked difference in colour. The white balance is much warmer than the other two, despite them all being set to auto at the start. 40,000 and we've lost the Z7ii. And you know something? The Z6ii seems to be better than the D5. Well, in this test anyway. So what are your thoughts? In that test, those extremely high ISOs look pretty good, don't they? Makes you wonder why we're not using 64,000 all the time. Well, let's take a closer look. This is the D5 at 64,000. It's really not very good, is it? The Z6ii doesn't look too bad, but bear in mind not all the ISO settings that your camera tells you it can do are usable. In fact, the top 25% are probably awful. Well, that's depending on your taste, of course. Back to reality, looking at the 8000 ISO with the D5 and then the Z6ii. And finally, yeah, the Z7ii. It's good to see that the Z7ii is more than okay at this range, bearing in mind what I said in my last video. Looking at some recent images I've taken at 8000 ISO with both the D5 and the Z6ii, They look pretty good, don't they? So from what we've seen so far, high ISO is okay to a point, but it really depends on a few things. One, whether the image is exposed correctly. Two, if we need to help it out in the software later. Three, the subject and of course the camera. So I guess the question is, what do I do if I'm in a situation where I have really poor lighting conditions? I hear nobody ask. Well, quite often with higher ISO, we just can't afford to crop in. So I make sure the image is pretty much the finished size. I sometimes use a lower shutter speed than I would do normally, and then I zoom out to include some of the surroundings. In this image, I've chosen to move away from my usual dog jumping frame filler to include the handler too. Any slight movement blur is then too far away to see. It's a cheat, but that's what you have to do. In rock photography, it's perfectly acceptable to make some noise, if not absolutely encouraged. Now, there's some very good noise suppressing software, of course. Don't for goodness sake overdo it. It can smooth definition until the image looks like a 1980s top of the pop singer. My apologies if you hadn't heard of that program. Please do look it up on YouTube. I promise you it'll be worth it just for the shock value alone. So that's my slightly rambling explanation as to why I voiced concerns about the Z9's native ISO in my last video and why I'm now much happier. And I cannot wait to connect the Z9 to this. Yes, more controversy. Now, I know what I said previously and I still stand by it. Generally speaking, if you already own an F-mounted 70-200 2.8, it's more financially astute to use that lens with an FTZ adapter. I've bought this Z7ii because I intend to use the Z9 as my pro sports camera. And to be honest, I need all the focus speed I can get. Now, in my next video, I'm testing this. The Tamron 150-600 G2 zoom lens, and I'm going to be comparing it to my trusty Nikon 300mm 2.8 fitted to a Nikon x2, x1.7 and x2 teleconverters. Okay, and then I'm going to do just the 300 on its own, and then we're going to try and see what it's like if you simply crop it in. Thank you so much for joining me, and as you know what I'm going to say, because I always say it, if you like this video, then please like it below. And if you really liked it and you want to see how this beast carries on, then try on the subscribe button. You know it'll suit you. Until next time, take care and keep taking photographs, and keep talking to me. Keep leaving those messages underneath. I do read them, and I do try to answer them. Okay, take care. See you soon.